Hey there, everybody. For anybody who's joining, this is going to be a very quick, very casual live stream build session. So I'm just going to build things and share my screen, essentially why I build things. Today, I'm probably going to end up focusing on building out a HeyGen AI avatar workflow. And that's mostly because I have a Claude bot running over here that she is now somewhat relatively alive. She's choosing her own name, her own everything. But she does need some sort of like pipeline or integration to create, videos through. And I want to make sure that I'm part of that like human in the loop approval process. Just looking at myself on these different live streams, this is odd stuff. This is the first time I've ever done a live stream. Probably won't be my last either. These are interesting. Okay, so how are we going to architect this thing out becomes the question. Can I share my screen while I do this because it's valuable for everybody to see exactly how somebody goes about creating these sort of, here it is, these sort of things. That'll be my full window as well. Okay. So usually I actually end up using Figma, or I actually end up using Claude, but Claude is acting odd today, and that's mostly because of the application and memory. So I just need to make sure that I kind of like reset it. Yeah, a lot of these things. See if I could. Okay, I could do a hard reset, but hopefully that was enough. There it is. Yeah, I agree. Continue. Personal use. Skip. I'm actually setting up a new account right now. All right, so this is just like I'm setting up a new Claude account, so that's why it had me go through all that. I'm going to go back to my usual one. So what is Claude? Claude is one of the frontier labs. If you haven't heard about them, then this is a very good introduction to it. Claude is compared to OpenAI, potentially much more enterprise focused. It's more focused on complex reasoning uh, and augmentation than it is at general Q&A and um, single purpose like problem solving essentially, right? But ultimately, like I'm using OpenAI almost like by default. I use the OpenAI Atlas browser, so I'm always using it to essentially help me in the actual browser my browser workflows. Now that said, let's go over here to n8n workflows. This is a project in Claude. There's a such thing as projects. Let me actually show you under the hood. I think that's actually as under the hood as it gets. So there's memory instructions and files. The files are usually essentially long form pieces of context that you want to provide to the actual project. The project, it has certain chats that are kind of enriched by the project files and instructions, but also a bit of memory as well based off of your usage of the project. I think more interestingly here is, you can really go crazy with this stuff. And I went a bit crazy with this Agentic AI project where I actually ended up putting together a series of, the agentic design patterns that really make a difference when you're trying to architect more sophisticated systems that can reason through relatively complex, very abstract problems at scale. These are usually what I turn to. Here, there's the agentic design patterns PDF, the 430 something page guide, but also some documentation for key um, tools. Zod, which is a way of enforcing certain schema for whatever we're building. OpenRouter as the ALLM API, router of sorts. If you're not aware of OpenRouter is essentially a unified interface for all LLMs. The way that I use it, I have certain keys, and don't worry, none of these are actually like publicly facing, so nothing to be stolen here. But there are different API keys for different projects, and what you can essentially do is make sure that each one gets each one has its own models using the key, and then get credited to it. Now, one of the most recent things I've done with this is compare it for the Claude bot, and ultimately I set up DeepSeek v3.2, considering that it has such low input and output costs for the level of reasoning that it has. This is an open source Chinese model, very, very strong model. If we were to compare it to, let's say, Ollama 4 Maverick, which is just Ollama General. let's just try that one. Ollama is one of the more recent, Ollama is a meta open source AI model. I just compare it on the tokens. DeepSeek is beating it on the output just somewhat, but it has lower context. I might actually end up switching to Ollama 4. But this one does have reasoning, which is what's really important for what I have it placed on. So that's shouldn't get too into the weeds here. Let's compare it to like a GPT 5.2, right? Just 5.2 regular. That's the thinking model essentially. You can see that the input and the output costs really change here. And it also has max output tokens and all these things. These are like essentially how you start to reason through what model to actually use. 5.2 is actually one of my standard models for clients, considering the stability and basically the capability to reason through complex problems. If we were to put together like maybe Opus 4.5, Opus 4.5 is Anthropic's most recent model, most recent frontier, their best model. Until they're going to launch a new one soon. But here for Opus, you can see that the input kind of just skyrockets compared to 5.2, and the max tokens kind of drops. So ultimately, I mean, they're all great models. The 5.2 Pro is currently, if we were to put an IQ level onto each model, you'll find that GPT 5.2 is the best, the smartest model. Granted, it is incredibly slow. So you basically want to set it and forget it overnight, basically. But look at the cost here. The output goes to $168 per million tokens. It's insane. So rarely use that. Gemini 3 Pro is one of my favorites. I actually have a subscription to them, and mostly because of their context length. It's a million tokens that they can ingest into their context, and then the cost isn't abhorrent, right? What better one than Gemini 3 Pro? Gemini 3 Pro is usually best for multimodal and multimodal reasoning. So if you have like an image that you want to reason through, let's say a construction plan that you want to extract details from, that's something that you want to get into. But ultimately, I think 3 Flash is one of the best go-to base standard LLM models to use in development and then also in production, depending on your use case, because of its context length, because it has a generally lower input cost and lower output cost than comparable models, but it also does multimodal reasoning very, very well. I think there's a reason why Google ended up getting the Apple deal to be the standard LLM model on powering Siri in the next generation of phone. So that's somewhat of a, believe it or not, that's a somewhat shallow dive into the model. So I ultimately went with DeepSeek for my Claude bot. Now, to bring it back up a layer, we I personally set up my Claude workspace to have projects that have, a relatively decent amount of context around them. ChatGPT also has those too. Let's see if I can actually go to that without sharing too much, right? If we go to Explore GPTs. So we have, GPTs here, and you can set them up very similarly, but it isn't exactly the same. A project is it's project based. GPT is more like apply it to the specific prompt, and then you can have a continuous conversation with that GPT sometimes. One of the best things that I use it for is kernel, like prompt optimization and ingesting certain amount of context within a particular prompt. So if we were to go back to, let's say, let me go back to the kernel prompt to show you. So for GPT, is basically you wrap it around the model, you give it instructions similar to the project, some conversation starters, and some initial uploaded files. For what I do have it set up with for the kernel prompting framework, it's just instructions. I believe the agentic AI architect that I have has a decent amount of knowledge baked into it. So the main difference here is like, help me architect a workflow that can respond to my OpenClaw agent's video generation requests based on her desired foundational appearance settings. So how am I kind of like piecing this all together? I'm going to get into exactly what I'm building in a second, but just to wrap up the whole like agentic AI architect, this sort of like how do you use GPTs? Um, so you can just do AI. Well, it seems like this is going to give me some trouble. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go to thinking over here. We're going to do it. That's agentic AI architect. So that's how we apply a GPT to our current prompt. And we're just going to set on to thinking. So then it goes through this a bit faster. We're going to set it and somewhat forget it for now. Because we also have Claude over here. And we're going to set this on the agentic AI. We're just going to compare the two, see how they both reason through. But ultimately, I mean, what sort of technologies are we really using right now? Ultimately, we want to put everything into an N8N workflow. For those of you who aren't familiar with what an N8N workflow looks like or what it is, it's essentially a way of orchestrating uh, automations. It's a way of automating things. But automating is not the same as orchestration. So here, this is an example, a YouTube content ideation pipeline where on a weekly schedule, we actually extract certain the example or source YouTube ideas. We process it, we aggregate them, we rank them and filter them, and then we start getting the transcripts, and then we turn them into like a summarized set of results. Right? It's basically just a way um, of like idea extraction. So here, what you'll find is that we're using OpenAI to generate we're using OpenAI to generate some of these ideas, putting into Notion as part of the process. So what we want to do is actually build something similar to that using that type of like node interface of extracting information, transforming it, and then loading it or processing it and providing it to me or to whatever uh, you know requester is involved in executing the workflow. We essentially want to do something similar here. So this is an empty canvas. We can also build with AI in N8N. I found that it's decent. It just isn't very creative with how it goes about using certain, some of the best and most recent AI tools, which change day by day. So in terms of the tools, uh, N8N is where we're going to end up putting it all, right? HeyGen is the AI avatar base, or at least the one option for creating the AI avatar base that turns into the video. Then 11 Labs is essentially the platform for creating the voice. And then Kling is an option here where it can essentially generate videos for us. And the thing about Kling is that it does video and audio at the same time. There are other options as well. There's Gemini, I think Gemini VO 3.1 that does the same thing. There's also Sora and things like that. But what we're aiming for isn't so much like a fully seen with audio and a fully directed kind of short form clip, like a clip within a larger short form clip. We're aiming for just like a talking head style avatar. Let's finish this setup up. Create a quick folder, OpenClaw. I haven't tried the 11 Labs agent platform yet, but it seems powerful. It could potentially replace Recall. Okay. Now another option actually, and this is something that I'm going to have to set up as well at some point, is potentially using Midjourney with the OpenClaw bot to generate videos as well. But step by step, right? So let's see. So Claude seems to have finished up. I have a certain system prompt set up in both of these that's a bit stronger in Claude, where it essentially requires the application of quote unquote like the algorithm. It's Elon Musk's like way of problem solving. So it does provide like non-standard output. So if you start seeing my outputs and start wondering, okay, why is it structured like this? It's because of that. Like the first principle challenge is part of it. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So it basically started assessing based off of that algorithm exactly. It starts questioning the requirements and asking me better questions to create a better output. All right. So back to it. Define OpenClaw. OpenClaw is autonomous AI agent workflow via HTTP request. The idea being that the OpenClaw, it has root level access. It can do fetch commands or curl commands from the terminal directly into the workflow. Avatar persistence. So same avatar. Every avatar may change. We want this to be interoperable and multi-use for any avatar requester should provide. So we're making sure that the we could set up this workflow so then essentially we hard code the appearance settings of the Claude bot into the workflow, but it probably won't be. We want to make sure, considering that we might use multiple different Claude bots in the future for OpenClaws, that the appearance can be somewhat malleable or changeable, right? Dynamic. So 3 voice source. So in terms of the input contract, what the OpenClaw sends, I would expect it to essentially provide appearance and generation. Okay, so we now are providing it with the pipeline specs. You can go over here and review what GPT thinks of this. Yeah, by putting it through the agentic AI architect here, it's starting to apply certain design patterns to particular parts of the workflow. Applying the agentic AI architecture, those design patterns to this might have been overkill because we're just putting together a simple workflow, right? But this gives us an idea of how to architect this for mass scale. Ultimately, I'm going to end up using this at mass scale. The target is to build something that does 1,000 pieces of content per day. But this is just like a start. Okay. Now simplify this down because it's giving me a lot of really good patterns. Honestly, like it's spot on with a lot of this stuff. They're also finding the same thing where there are different options for outputs, and Kling and is not the best one. HeyGen is likely the most stable out of all of them. This is building it for an actual full code implementation. Okay. So now let's go back to Claude, see what it's putting together. It's reasoning through, but it seems to want to delete HeyGen because it thinks Kling accept is a better option. Probably if you consider that Kling is cheaper, but HeyGen is likely higher quality, but that might just be bias. Let me actually go back here. Okay, so Claude wants to use 11 Labs to generate the audio, then provide that to Kling to then generate the video to it, which is something I honestly wasn't aware that was possible, but it's a good workflow. This is the request contract for OpenClaw as a script, as the appearance JSON, a stringified JSON file or object. It's voice settings for 11 Labs, agent settings, and then we have the output. It's providing a bit too much detail at this point. But it's good to see. This is the final output that I would expect from this sort of workflow. Status with the audio, with the video, complete video, and download URL. That's exactly what I need. So I'm going to compare this workflow that's where it's focusing on HeyGen and ask it to compare it to the Kling workflow. I think that's HB 11 Labs. Okay. So let's go back down to here. All right, Claude now essentially simplified it down to, so the components it was considering for a full code build out is now being translated over into n8n. 4 nodes. I'm not entirely sure 4 nodes is actually what the end result of what we want. So we want upload audio to some storage exactly, then Kling, and node 5. This is the visualized workflow here. So now what we want to do is essentially, it created a final essentially workflow for us, but we want to remove some of the context, like the previous context of the full code build out, and turn it into an actual project plan, an implementation plan. Once we get that, we can then go over into the n8n project that we have. And because I have an n8n MCP server integrated into Claude, maybe we can show you that real quick while it loads capabilities, I think it is. But because we have this n8n integration, it'll essentially, not entirely sure where this is now. It'll use the most recent N8N docs to build a actual workflow that we can just copy paste into it. All right, and here we have a comparison between the 11 labs plus Kling or the 11 labs plus HeyGen. HeyGen is much more presentation video and a more persistent avatar identity, which is critical if you're building out like an identity for an AI bot that you want to be public facing, right, on an actual Instagram profile. Okay, so I'm giving GPT a different set of instructions, telling it to actually put together one overall workflow architecture that ends up uh, essentially providing me with the option of using either Kling or HeyGen, which is different from what I told Claude to do, but I'm just trying to understand exactly like what these two can actually look like. Yeah. So the MCP server for N8N, usually I just added here, remote MCP server URL. For some reason, it's not exactly showing up here, but we go to N8N workflows. I think I know what it is. Yep. So I actually have to use Claude Desktop. Yeah, exactly. I'm not entirely sure why that happens, but it seems to me like Atlas does not tend to like working with the Claude prompts. I think it's set up here properly. Settings, connectors. Yeah, I mean, this is much more configured. So here we have the N8N MCP. Okay, so what we're actually going to end up having to do is switch over to Claude Desktop. I should actually end up integrating it into the actual Claude on browser, but in the end. So let's go back to chat. Here we now have the final schematic for just the HeyGen. Oh, this one's using Kling too. Just a Kling, but no HeyGen on this one, and we'll just provide it over here. We're going to store video and audio in Backblaze. It's much cheaper than these two, and it's also interoperable with S3. But most people don't know about Backblaze, but they're relative. So yeah, so we now have this N8N workflow working on the side. You can close this out, and we have this over here. So overall, I mean, what have we done so far? Let's see if I can outline it. So first, we had to do some basic research. So first, we took our intention, and then we turned it into basically a researched tool set. We had to understand exactly what we wanted to build and what we could build with. So from there, we ideated across LLMs. I think one thing that we have to consider here is that we considered multiple multiple plans, and then we also considered workflow scaling. So if you're wondering like what this is Miro. Miro is just like a planning board to canvas for this sort of thing. It's relatively standard use in workflow optimization, workflow design. I actually end up using Figma more often than not, but that's neither here nor there. And then go back. It's like an overcomplication of the overall process, but we essentially we had the intention. We understood what we wanted. We researched the tool set, validated across LLMs. We compared and contrasted different options based off the tool set. We started putting things together that we hadn't thought of. And then we weighed the trade-offs of that, considering LLM costs and input outputs and the rest, right? We also understood that we don't want this to be hard coded in. We don't want it to be like just one workflow for one avatar. You want, considering what we're working with, OpenClaw, to provide the appearance settings and everything else for the content that it wants to produce. So then we then turn that into a generally open, malleable content generation pipeline. So let's look over here. Seems like it's done here. I think we should be able to copy and paste it. And there it is. This is just one option, right? The idea is like we keep our options open so long as we're figuring out what it is that we're trying to build. So now what we want to do is, this is interesting, voice design. Might actually get the OpenClaw agent to build its own voice, which I can ask it to do right now. I have it integrated into my WhatsApp, so it has all this. Okay, I just tasked it with looking into the voice design documentation and figuring out how to design itself a voice. Let's go back over here. Is it done? So why is it? I'm just looking at parameters. Okay, it's going too far. Sometimes the LLM just go into way too much detail. Well, anyway, that said, so I mean, let's look at what this thing is like. What's the actual end workflow ultimately? we have this OpenClaw agent. We've tested with basically being AI influencer. What we wanted to do is essentially design its own appearance, design its own voice, then basically manage its own content creation pipeline. So we're putting together like an AI influencer essentially. I already gave it access to one of my Instagram profiles. Let's see if I have it up here. This is one of my throwaway accounts. It has a decent amount of followers, but it's not really, active right now. So basically just give it access to this. And what we wanted to do is just post for itself. Right. Soon enough, we also wanted to do more than just be an AI influencer. Soon enough, we'll also make it like an AI assistant, right? Then we also wanted to end up being like an AI SDR as well. AI SDR is probably going to come before AI assistant. Why? Because in order to be an effective AI influencer, like who who is the Claude bot trying to influence? We've already done the deep research on the MCP and not the MC, the ICP, we went through the Reddit forums and public profiles of people within the target market to understand exactly what they're saying, how they're describing the problem that they're having within the actual area that they're having it in. We also looked into the demographics, the most common demographics of the ICP, and reverse engineered that into a set of appearances and like the actual AI influencer's appearance that will be most effective in stopping their scroll. And then keeping the authority that's required in order to appropriately influence them in what's essentially a B2B function. So that all happens essentially in between here, which I honestly wish it had like a way to, I guess I can just do this. So that like foundational research to provide the OpenClaw with context within its memory system is really critical. I actually had to upgrade the OpenClaw agent with a completely new memory system and a new set of skills across the board with coding as its core interface with the world in order to make it at least somewhat relatively, effective. Um, Setting up an OpenClaw, you can do it in 30 minutes, especially if you have the soul, the heartbeat, and everything else pre-created or already pre-configured to an extent. And you can do that. And maybe we can do that tomorrow. But it's the equivalent of putting a general person onto a task. It's like what sort of context you have to provide them with, and then some, because you also have to provide them with security protocols of like what to do, what not to do in this setting. Context of like the business and the area that they're like living in, or like not living in, but like operating in, and some general common sense as well that you would expect a general person to have in those first two, but you have to really be careful and have it do its own security audit. And I had to make sure that it did that beforehand. Yeah. So it's working on all the lab stocks. So this is just like one workflow of some sort. What if I could just frame this? And these all ultimately actually end up becoming this one pipeline, actually. All right. And you can imagine with an AI SDR and AI assistant that those are going to be very different. I don't want to jump to AI assistant. I don't want to give it access to all of my personal stuff because you've seen what these things can do online. When they go onto Moltbook or whatever it is, they can be coerced into providing a lot of information. And right now it's siloed off almost completely. And I've also made sure that the API keys are all rate limited and just in case, right? So if anything happens, I can just reset the MacBook unless they do some sort of like complete destructive command. But I also made sure that it was aware of any sort of like prompt injection hacks. So this AI content generation pipeline, let's see if this is done. Seems to be. All right, let's go back to here. Okay, it's going to start building that now. And let's actually call this. So what else do we have to build as part of this overall system becomes the question. Usually the best use of something like Claudebot is something that you're already doing, or to fill a gap of something that you aren't capable of getting to just yet. So for an AI SDR, basically CRM management, we wanted to do CRM management. We wanted to do like prospect scoring and research, which is kind of part of CRM management, but it's more so like, okay, actually now start looking at the prospects and understanding them. Then we want to do personalized outbound. We also want to do personalized lead magnets. So these are like 4 things that we want to build out. And then finally, once those are all flowing, well, we're going to have essentially calls on the calendar, so to speak. So calendar management is step 1 there. Then there's client management. And we can start giving it some like larger scale now that has like additional context, and we're proving that it can operate within the business relatively well. We can start doing like actual business development tasks. All right, let's see what's going on over here. It's still building. Okay. All right. It's done designing its voice. Let's see if I can copy and paste this here or just put it in. She says she decided who she's going to be as well. So she's a young adult female in her late 20s to early 30s. Say warm, smooth, and intelligent, neutral American accent with slight Asian American influence, speaking at a moderate conversational pace with clear and enunciation. Voice. I think one thing about DeepSeek that I'm noticing is that it can be, I don't know, high level. It doesn't think very deeply, and maybe that's just because I'm used to or accustomed to OpenAI and Claude. But anyway, so that workflow is done. But let me finish with this first. This application. Let's see what it does. I don't know if I have the credits for generating voice, but in the end, we're about to find out. So can put this over here potentially. All right. So this is what OpenAI came up with. Much more complex. Not bad. It sounds a bit too perfect. What's this voice? If we're going with voice number 2. I'm gonna call OpenClaw V1 language value. Let's go with English. It wasn't bad. Not gonna lie, it was pretty good. The first one was too perfect. The second one was almost the opposite. Almost like it had some vocal fry in it, which is what I wanted to hear. It had some actual breathing involved, like included, which is ideal. But it does sound a bit. It sounded a bit like less authoritative. That said, we aren't looking for a complete authority. We can modify it in the future. But this is interesting stuff. All right, I can probably spend way too much time on this. But back to this. All right, so let's finish up this workflow. We're nearly there. We have the webhook, which is how we actually set things up with 11 Labs. We parse and normalize whatever we get, which is something that the Claude workflow didn't do. We have feature flags. All right. Then we have cling. If we have a failure there, okay, it's now routing failures. Good. Missing script, decide root. Okay. And then we have Agent 11 Labs. We have cling 11 Labs, which is odd. Why cling first? All right. Anyway, we save it into a bucket. Agent create video, cling create task, cling wait. So we wait one way or another. Let's try to spruce this up real quick so that we have a clear view of what's actually going on. So we move this up and this up. Okay. I'm going to tell you right now, I know one looks like much more complicated and much more thoughtful, but I mean, there's some key things that need to be considered in a workflow in order to make it functional. The Claude version of it didn't get those right from the start, but it did get the overall like simplicity of it right. And I did give it the simplicity instruction. So ultimately it is what it is. But one thing I'm questioning here is that we're starting with HeyGen and the AI avatar generation instead of starting with the 11 labs, the audio itself. But ultimately, this is it, essentially. And you can see here that this one thought through a loop. Both of them actually thought through a loop to pull the status of the generation of a video. The video generation could take some time. But ultimately, they both get it right, and they both upload, and then they finalize, and then they send it out for use. Sometimes there's missing scripts or route failures. OpenAI is using much more code than in the Claude option. But ultimately, we now have we have 2 basic workflows with some additional work that needs to be done on both in order to finalize it. But both essentially are the foundation of a Claude bought a AI influencer video generation pipeline, and our Claude bot now has a voice that she created herself, and I just chose between the available options. All right, that'll be everything for today. If I might have just been talking to myself for an hour and a half, but ultimately, hope you all enjoy, and I'll try to spruce this up and turn it into an actual YouTube video showing how I go about creating this and how you can potentially create it for yourself too.